At this stage, before we go into any further detail, the kind of detail that you're going to want to put in your final sculpture, detailing like the plates or the barbs or spikes on the tail, this is the time that you want to really take a good look at the design that you've created, and you want to double check all of the relationships of these different forms. The length of the tail versus the length and size of the neck and head. The length of the legs in relationship to the overall length of the animal's body, the Stegosaurus's body. You can use it, the best way is probably with calipers like these, which are adjustable. I like them a lot. And you can measure the length of where the neck starts at the shoulders to the tip of the head, and then count off how many lengths of the animal's body it is, or just to simply check this also just against the length of the tail. So break up the measurements that you do to get a really good, concise understanding of how they all play together. And also you want to pick it up and you want to look at it from different directions. You want to look at both sides, see if you get a good feeling. Make sure that your sculpture isn't leaning one way or another, which shows that the legs would be shorter on one side or the other. And hold it and look underneath. See that you have a nice formal design that goes down the backbone, one side, divide one side from the other by the backbone, and see that there's a good balance of relationship there. Okay? And also at this time, you also want to compare it to the pictures that you started with that have been guiding you all along. Most of these pictures that are from the internet of the Stegosaurus, a lot of these are very scientifically accurate, if in nothing else, the measurements and the lengths, because they're based on the original skeletons that were found. So always use this kind of information to help with your design. So there you have it. That's the stage right here where you want to do all that double checking before you move into your detail. Okay, so as I said, we're pretty close now to doing some detail work on it, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how to approach doing the detail. Doing a sculpture, you have to strategize what you're going to do first, second, and third. And as I've emphasized before, the most important thing in the early stages is to get a good relationship between the shapes before you complicate your design with final detail. Get your major forms right. Get the forms so that they're if necessary measured. If you feel that your eye isn't giving you a good sense of the particular relationship between the head and the length of the tail, then get your calipers or even a little stick or some measuring device that you could use to measure the head, using that as your measuring guide, and then count off, make a point on the tail and say, well, let me see, how many heads would that tail be? Okay, and the same thing with the body. You can do that right across all the way down the back of the spinal cord. You can measure how far it is from the back of the head to where the neck actually starts to meet the shoulders here, and then up the back over the body to where the tail point that you created down here appears. So constantly check that. The other thing you want to do is you want to check how formal your design is on either side. It should have a good balance to it. Your sculpture shouldn't, I'll bring this one back here, your sculpture shouldn't be leaning one way or another. That's not the way the animal would be, because it's off balance and it would fall. So you want to check that balance in the forms. Like I said, kind of a dividing line right from the beginning of the snout here, right down the back, following that backbone, all the way down. That's your dividing line. And make sure that the volume, your shapes, are of equal mass on both sides of your sculpture. Also, take a look, turn your sculpture over. Look and see if you've smoothed out those forms and also created the same kind of standard, equal formal designs on both sides. Check the length of your legs. Make sure that the front leg is the same length in distance as, you know, from the shoulder down to the toe. Even though it's bent, you can do some measurements with your caliper once again, or you could use a little string cut to measure from the shoulder to the toes on either foot. And on this design here, you can see where we haven't put the foot in yet, and I'm going to show you that once again. And also notice that this foot's a little bit shorter. This one isn't quite touching in the back, so we can just move that down so it touches nicely. And then once again, just pinch to create that foot in the front for that front leg. And then make sure that it's touching nicely. So it's nicely positioned and balanced like that. And if you turn this over, you can see we have still a lot of work to do to clean this up underneath. And that's what you should do. You should do all of this before you move to the next stage, which is the detail. Take one last look at that before we start on the detail. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to move back to this piece, the original piece, and show you where I've created some detail. Now you've noticed that I haven't at any point here put on the plates or anything, because the plates are very fragile. If you start to put on the plates, this is what I'm talking about, strategizing. You put on the plates and the spikes. These are very delicate, final detail structures that you're going to be putting on the sculpture. And what will happen is you're going to want to go back and maybe create some more lines on the skin or whatever. And when you do that, you'll be constantly banging into the plates or to the spikes. So you'll waste a lot of time repairing those damages that you inflicted on yourself. So what we want to do is go over and create these skin details and even the little toe details before you get to that stage. And that's what we're going to do next. I'm going to show you once again, like on the rhino. We're going to take little bits of clay like this. We can do it in two ways. Little piece of clay, and where I have a little wrinkle here, we could do that by applying a little piece of clay to create a wrinkle. And then this is where we would use our tool to smooth it in to create that effect. And again, we have to constantly, you can use our fingers. If your fingers are small enough, we can smooth that as much as we can. And finally, you can go back with a brush and smooth those areas to create the wrinkles. Work them in so that they blend in nicely. They look like they're part of the flesh of the animal, folding over as he moves his leg forward, creating those creases. Now the other way you can do it, of course, is to take your tool and you can, like you can see I've done on the tail here, very subtle kind of wrinkles there on the tail, and you can cut that up like that, and or you could use a tool, one of these wire tools, and you could actually cut out a little bit of the clay, and then you would brush over with your brush to create that soft wrinkle effect on the tail. Now the other thing, of course, you want to be doing is you want to be looking to see if you've created all the muscle areas. You can see I've created a little muscle area here on the back leg, and you can do that by simply taking your tool, your wire tool, and cutting in like that to create the back part of the smoothing off the edge there. You can do it either with a wire tool, or you could also do it with the side of your flat tool here, and then smooth it as you would, just like you would use your finger. And you could also use your finger to go back in there, which helps to smooth a lot of times. And then with the final detailing, you might want to go over with a brush. Alright, so we just created that there. Now, on the toes, if you take a look at the toes, all I've done is simply take a tool, and I've made a little notches in here and cut out just a little bit of section there on the toe, rounded it over, and that's the way you can start to form those toes. These toes on a Stegosaurus are very similar to what you might see on an elephant's foot. So maybe a little bit more elongated than an elephant's toe, but generally take a look at animals that would have kind of a similar body mass, like a rhino or a buffalo, or excuse me, a rhino or an elephant, or even a hippopotamus. All might have feet that would give you a good idea of what a Stegosaurus foot might have been like. Okay, so you can see that. Now on the face is a very different area to work on. It usually requires a lot more concentration, and it needs to be very accurate to convey the sense of that animal's face. A lot of times what I like to do is in the maquette, just to give a sense, which is what I've really done here, to give a sense of what the Stegosaurus's face looked like based on a lot of the images that I found. You can see I've tried to create a face similar to that. But what you might want to do, if you want to do a really detailed face, what you might want to do is do an enlarged face, maybe the size of what your full sculpture would want to be. You would want to be, because remember, these are maquettes that we're doing, which are just a model to give you a sense of what the larger sculpture is that you want to create. And in that case, then you could simply take your clay and just have the form of the head, which in the case of the Stegosaurus is a kind of a triangular shape, and then you would want to put it on, or put it on a little piece of support clay to hold it up while you worked on it, like something like this. Okay, or even if you have a pole, a rod that you can put it on, this is where you would want to do the detailing to make a more accurate look of what the animal's real head looked like. And then you can add it on to the sculpture after you create your larger design. Now, if that's a little bit confusing about the head, and you would like more information on that, we will be doing more work on showing you how to do the head separately to get that great detail that you would like to have for your final sculpture. We'll be doing that in some of the videos coming up in the future. But for right now, I'm just giving you a sense of how you could strategize to get to that point. Alright, so now let's move to the plates. So assuming that we have gotten all the detail done that we want on this design, now we're going to put on the very final detail of the plates in the case of the Stegosaurus. So I'm going to move this sculpture out of the way for a moment, and I'm going to just focus on the detailed piece here that we started with. Now what you want to do, once again, in the final detail, you want to go back to your pictures and you want to check, you want to count the number of these plates. You also want to count the number of these plates on different designs that other people have done, because in the process of researching this for this piece, I've counted maybe 6 to 8 different renditions of the Stegosaurus, and what I found is the plate numbers vary. So in that case, count maybe 8 different designs, and just do an averaging of how many plates are there, and then use that average number to put the number of plates on your sculpture. So first of all, what we can see is that the plates start out smaller at the neck. They start to get larger and larger, and they get, probably the biggest plates are back here towards the upper part at the base of the tail right here. So we're going to start working our way up. Now I have, as you can see here, made a lot of little plates here, different sizes. And I'm going to start putting them on. And the way you want to do that is that you want to, and as you can see, they're just little pieces of flat clay that I've flattened out, and I'll show you how I do that. Just take an extra little piece of clay, roll it in your fingers to get it the right softness you want, and just kind of squeeze it and shape into a little bit of a point, a little bit of a triangle there. And you can leave a little bit of a holding point on right here at the end. That'll make it easy for you to put the piece in place. And also you need a little bit of that clay in order to fuse to your sculpture. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold it in my one finger like this, take my tool, and I'm just going to kind of push it in place there, like that. If you can kind of see what I'm doing, I'm just taking that little tab and pushing it over. And I don't want to do as much on this side, just a little bit to get a joint feeling there. And take a look. Does that look right according to your picture? Or is the plate a little too big? Well, in this case, I think the plate's a little bit too big. So rather than try to cut it down on here, I'm just going to take it off, and I'm going to pinch it down a little bit more. As you can see, I'm just pulling away, rolling and pulling away some of that clay from that piece. I'm going to take my tool, I'm just going to cut that excess off, and then I'm going to go back and try again. And I'm going to push that on to the neck like that. Alright? So, and when you start off, it's going to almost look like a little ear. But that's the first of the Stegosaurus plates. Now the Stegosaurus plates appear to be offset. And what I mean offset is that they're not perfectly formal on each side. So if you have a plate of one size here, you don't have an identical plate right over here. It's a little bit further back on the neck. So I'm going to take my second little piece, take a little piece of clay and form another very small, once again pinching, another small little plate formed like that, and I'm going to put it on the other side of the neck, but set back just a little bit like that. And I'm going to take just a little bit of this clay that's excess here from pressing in. I'm just going to clean off that little bit of clay there. Same way in between the plates, just clean off any excess clay that's in there and move it into position with my tool. This kind of fine detail is too small for me to use my fingers on, and that's why you'll see that I'm using a tool. Okay, so you can see that. I'm going to take this plate out of the way here so it doesn't confuse you with the feet. Alright, so we have those two in place, and I'm going to just take my finger and position them a little bit. I'm going to move it up just slightly so that they're a little bit more erect on the back of the neck. Now, there's a little excess clay in around there, which I'm not going to worry about right now, because we can go back after we get the plates in place, all the plates, and just smooth it off like I'm doing here. But at this stage, I don't want to waste the time as much. I'm showing you how to do it, but I'm not going to waste a lot of time with that because of the fact that after we get these plates on, we might find that we want to change the position of some of those. So it's kind of pointless to put all that detail work into this until we get all of the plates in place and we get a good sense that they're exactly where we want them to be. We might also think, well, maybe they're right where we want them to be, but they're a little bit bigger than I want them to be in a particular position. So let's move along here and put some more plates on. Now, as I said, as we start to move up the neck, the plates get larger. I'm going to take one of these smaller plates I've created and adjusting it a little bit so that it increases in size just slightly. I'm going to cut off a little excess I had there, and I'm going to put that in place. Next, once again, offsetting. Like that. You can see we got one here, one here, one here, and one here. They're not opposite each other, they're offset. Again, another little plate. Pinch, a little plate like that, cut off the excess. Put the next plate in position. And in this case, I'll scrape off that little bit of clay there. Take a look at it. I'm going to take my tool, move it out a little tiny bit, like that. Separate them. And move on to my next plate. Now I'm going to be doing a faster process here to show you how to do it as opposed to what I would normally do. I would spend a little bit more time checking and making sure that each plate was secured the way I wanted it to and it was in exactly the right position. Move it this way so we can see what I'm doing here. Taking that plate with my finger just the way I start off, putting it down there like that. And going back over here, securing it on this side a little bit, like so. Now you can see how delicate these plates are attached. And you can probably get a good sense of why I'm using the technique or the strategy to save them to the last before I put them on, because they are very, very delicate and fragile in this stage and easily can move them with just the slightest touch. Next, we're going to do the next one. Again, same process. Rolling the bottom a little bit, pinching, smoothing, get a nice flat plate effect. And we're going to put this next plate. And this time what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my tool to put it on the end of the tool so that you can see what I'm doing. And I'm going to put it in position. And I'm going to go back and I'm going to hold it with my little index finger here. And it's a little bit too far up, so I'm going to shift it down a little bit with the tool, try to get it into position, and maneuver it with my tool, smoothing down a little bit and getting that plate in place as best I can, and then moving on to the next. A little bit larger. Moving to here, the next place up, taking off a little bit of the excess clay again, and using my tool again to position the plate. Let's take a look, and you can start to see it's starting to take on the characteristics of the Stegosaurus as we move along there. And we're going to follow this process all the way up the back. As you can see, what I've done is jumped ahead here because this is very repetitious, starting off putting the plates, but it's the very same process I do as I go all the way up over the back. Like I said, offsetting those plates back and forth, starting with the small ones in the front, working your way up to the largest ones right above the hip area, and then down the tail you start to decline the size of the plates till you get down to the last plate. And the last thing we're going to do here is we're going to put the spikes on. So let's take a look at our picture again, and we're going to go back. Remember, this is the top view. If it was unclear to you before, this is the top view, so that you would be in the skeletal structure. You would be looking down on the Stegosaurus like that, and that's what you're seeing there, is that shape. And you can see the spikes on the end of the tail. They have them flaring out. On the side view, you can see they're sticking out. These probably operated a lot like the way a porcupine's quills do, and probably used much in the same way, whipping the tail from side to side with those massive spikes would certainly cause great injury to any predator or even rival of its own kind. So let's put those last final details on. And we put it on very similarly to the way that we did the plates, which I can either put it on with my finger here, or in this case, so that it's easier to see, I'm going to take it and stick it on the end of my tool, and I'm just going to work it into the tail like that. Again, we always want to keep a sense of the center line that goes down the back, which is where the vertebra, top of the vertebra would be, right down the back of the body, the neck, right up to the back of the head here. Because we want our detail, like our spikes and our plates, to be equally balanced on either side of that central vertebra line. Same size spike on this side. Now in this case, as you can see in the picture, unlike the plates that are offset, the spikes are formal. They're equally positioned on either side of the tail. So we just work them in, and as you can see, they're very delicate to put on, and that's why we save detail like this to the very last. And then the final two are placed not at the very end of the tail, but just up from the tail, up from the end of the tail. And I think that this is a little too long, so I'm going to cut this down a little bit. Like that, and work it in. And this one looks like it's pretty close to the size. Take a little bit off the end. And work that into position. Move it up a little bit so you can see it. Alright, and you can see we still have that little bit of the tip of the tail hanging out, which you can see the pictures also indicate right here. right here. All right. And that's consistent with all of the designs I saw, so I feel comfortable in positioning my spikes in relationship to the end of the tail in the same way. And I'm going to just spread them apart a little bit, because I'm sure they're a lot more lethal being pushed out like weapons, and I'll show you what they look like when you look down on them, sticking out to the side like that. And just let me take a look here. And what I want to do is just smooth over that little bit of edge, make it go back in there. And go back and check the center line where your plates are, and you can smooth up and make it nice and neat all along there. And when you're finally done with the detail and you're comfortable that you've smoothed all the plates nicely with your brush and maybe a solvent that you're using, when you get all of that done, then your sculpture is pretty much completed. And at this point, I would be now planning to make the bigger Stegosaurus sculpture from using my ideas that I've worked out here in my maquette. I hope you've enjoyed the Stegosaurus sculpture. If you have any questions, you can email me and visit whatisasculpture.com. And I look forward to hearing your ideas and reading your questions. So take care until next time.